Chapter 12. Every step Luke put between his family and the chaos of downtown allowed him to breathe easier. Luke quickly calculated how long it would take before they made it out of the city and all the way toward the town. At their current pace, it would be about 2 hours on foot. But as the smoke started wafting in from the wildfires to the west, Luke wasn't sure if they could keep up the current pace.
"Dad, it's getting hard to breathe,"
Lenny said. Luke stopped and reached for the masks he'd brought in his pack. He had 4, one for each family member, but since Delilah wasn't here, he gave Missy the extra mask. Luke glanced to the west, where the fires were moving in their direction, and he couldn't help but think about his daughter and brother. Both were more than capable of surviving the fires, especially Kurt. But it was hard for a father not to worry. Savannah must have sensed Luke's concern, because she shot him a smile, which focused his thoughts on the pressing goal, getting to their cabin.
"I'm sorry, I need a break,"
Missy said, barely able to get the words out. The 4 paused near a bus bench and allowed Missy to rest. Luke kept a watchful eye for any danger. But now that they were past the city's most densely populated areas and entering the suburbs, he noticed that most people were staying inside. And given the screams and gunshots that could still be heard faintly from the downtown area, Luke didn't blame them. But he wondered what those people would do after a few days when their food and water ran out, and they realized no one would help them. He had a good idea of how they'd react, and he didn't want to be around when they understood the truth of their predicament. "Hey," Savannah said, walking up to Luke. "Missy's lips are turning blue." Luke glanced back at Missy on the park bench where Lenny sat with her. He couldn't see the color from where he was positioned, but Savannah stopped him before he could get closer. "Her heart isn't pumping enough blood to circulate oxygen," Savannah replied. When Luke and his family had taken a more serious approach to being prepared, they had all focused on different skills. Savannah had focused on medical care and first aid. "She lost a lot of blood from the wound before we were able to help her," Savannah said. "I think she needs a transfusion."
"Can she make it to the cabin?"
Luke asked. They had stored plenty of medical equipment at their bug-out shelter in their attempt to plan for a variety of health scenarios. "I don't know," Savannah said. Luke glanced at Missy on the bench and again thought of his daughter. He knew Spokane like the back of his hand. He'd grown up here, but he'd taken his knowledge of the city to another level when he started prepping.
"There's a clinic less than a mile down the road. We might find what we need if we can get her there."
"I think it's a good idea," Savannah said. They returned to the bench, and while Missy pretended she was better, her face was pale and gray. Luke didn't think the girl was going to last much longer. They headed down the road, moving as fast as Missy could walk, but when they neared the clinic, they encountered a large group of people and a police blockade. "What is this?" Savannah asked.
"I don't know,"
Luke answered. Luke would have tried to find another route, but given Missy's deteriorating condition, he didn't want to waste any more time. They worked their way up to the side of the crowd to the front and saw a cluster of police and SWAT uniforms keeping the crowd back. They were ensuring there wasn't a riot at the medical clinic. Everyone shouted for help, but the officers kept the bulk of the crowd back, only allowing a few in at a time.
"Everyone will get their chance to see the doctor. Just hang on."
The cop in front wore a bulletproof vest over his uniform, and he was drenched in sweat from the heat as people's frustration grew. "What should we do?" Savannah asked.
"We don't have time to wait in this line,"
Luke answered. Then he moved past the barricade near the end of the street so they could pass, and one of the cops rushed forward.
"Get back!"
the cop shouted.
"She needs help,"
Luke said, pointing at Missy. The cop took a good look at Missy before shaking his head.
"She waits in line, like everyone else." "Then just let us pass through,"
Luke said.
"We'll find help somewhere else." "You'll have to cross at the next street over," the cop said.
"Are you joking?" Luke said. "Look at her. She needs to get somewhere to rest. We live up the road. Just let us through." The cop raised his rifle in his hand and aimed it at Luke.
"Get back, now!"
Luke, it's not worth it, Savannah said. Luke might have been staring down the barrel of a rifle, but his anger was overriding his reason. Thankfully, Savannah was there to pull him back from the brink. But just as they were about to turn around, Missy collapsed. Luke and Savannah caught her in their arms before she hit the ground and then gently laid her on her back on the pavement. The crowds made moving more difficult, and Savannah shouted for everyone to create some space. Luke checked Missy's vitals. He looked up at the cop, who was watching the whole thing.
Is this urgent enough for you?
The cop stared at Missy's unconscious body. And then he finally lowered his weapon.
All right, bring her through.
Luke scooped Missy into his arms before the cop changed his mind. Then he scooted around the barrier, with Savannah and Lenny following. But the moment he moved through the barriers, the rest of the crowd grew upset.
How come he gets to go?
We need help too. What's so special about him?
The crowd's anger tested the cops' ability to keep the mob at bay. And Luke didn't think they would be able to hold them back for much longer. They hurried inside the clinic as a cop directed them to a room in the back. The clinic was small, no bigger than a fast food shop, and the interior was already packed with people who were shot, stabbed, bleeding, or unconscious, like Missy. A nurse came out, and Savannah explained the situation regarding the blood loss.
What's her blood type?
The nurse asked. No one knew, but Savannah was a universal donor, so she volunteered to give up some of her blood. They followed the nurse into the small room, and Luke laid Missy on the table. The nurse took Missy's blood pressure, and the girls started to wake up. But she muttered incoherently.
Blood pressure is 80/40, the nurse said. Her heart is failing. We need to get that transfusion going now.
The nurse quickly set up the needed material, moving swiftly and efficiently despite the circumstances. Luke and Lenny stood back as the nurse hooked up the blood tubes together, and then they started drawing Savannah's blood into a bag. And then that bag was filtered into Missy's body.
Just hang tight, the nurse said. I'll be back to check on you in a sec.
The nurse left, and there was more screaming and shouting outside. Luke was anxious to leave.
How long will this take?
Depends on how fast my blood pumps, Savannah answered, gesturing to the bag. I'm feeling pretty juiced, so hopefully it won't take long. She cracked a smile to lighten the mood, but it didn't help with Luke's tension. Luke walked back out into the lobby and studied the crowd. They were growing rowdier, pushing against the barriers. It was only a matter of time before that dam broke and those people flooded in there to take whatever resources they could get their hands on. Luke returned to the room, and Missy opened her eyes. She managed to speak coherently and requested some water, which Lenny gave her from his bottle.
Thanks,
Missy said.
How are you feeling?
Lenny asked.
A little better,
Missy answered.
Looks like your mom has superpowered blood.
I've been doing a lot of Pilates lately, Savannah said, and she and Missy smiled. The nurse returned and then took a few measurements of the blood bag.
Okay, we don't want to take too much from you, ma'am.
She removed Savannah's needle from her arm and tied it off so it wouldn't leak over the floor.
You got about a pint in you now. I recommend you take it easy for a while. Get some rest here and...
The gunshots outside made everyone jump. Luke rushed out to the lobby again and saw a trio of dead civilians on the other side of the barricade. The cop from earlier stood near the bodies with his smoking gun. But his aggression didn't have the desired effect on the angry mob as he intended. All at once, the crowd rushed forward, knocking down the barricades and attacking the police, who fired back a few more rounds but were overwhelmed by the sheer number of the mob itself. Luke rushed back into the room and picked Lenny up.
We need to go, now,
he said, looking at Missy.
If you want to come with us, you need to be able to keep up.
I can do it, Missy said, and she sat up, swinging her legs over the side. She almost fell forward, but she caught herself. Savannah hooked her arm through Missy's.
We need to go out the back. Hurry,
Luke shouted, and they rushed out of the exam room and into the hallway. Luke turned around to see the first flood of people rush inside, and he shouted for his wife and Missy to hurry. Lenny clutched Luke tightly, hiding his face in his shoulder, and they sprinted out the back of the clinic, which dumped into a narrow alleyway. Luke turned north, and as they sprinted away, they heard more screams and a few gunshots as the crowd ripped the clinic apart. Chapter 13. Delilah sprinted away from the gunman as fast as her tired legs could carry her, but every breath she drew was filled with smoke that choked her lungs. She kicked up ash and dust on her frantic retreat, using the limited cover of the trees to shield herself from the gunfire. Delilah returned to the rocks near the river where Tiffany and Sammy were still waiting, and she screamed at them to run as fast as they could. They didn't move at first, but the gunshots snapped them out of their stupor. "Find a place to hide and do it now," Delilah said. The girls fell in line behind Delilah, chasing her through the woods. When Delilah glanced behind her, she saw only one of the gunmen in pursuit. "Get into the trees!" Delilah shouted, and she pointed to her left. The fires had stripped the forest of its greenery, but most of the trees still stood, and the trunks were thick and close together in that section of the woods. It was good for hiding. They darted in that direction, and Delilah waved for them to keep going ahead of her. Neither of the girls protested, and the trio sprinted into the thick of the forest. The gunmen continued to chase them with gunfire. But the girls were too hopped up on adrenaline to slow down. The predator chasing them was cumbersome and slow, allowing Delilah and the girls to put some space between them. After they'd been running for a while and Delilah couldn't see the enemy behind them, she slowed, and the girls finally stopped. Sammy and Tiffany were hunched over to catch their breath, while Delilah was barely winded.
Who were those people?
Tiffany asked. "I don't know," Delilah answered, "but I need to go back for my uncle."
Are you crazy?
Tiffany asked. "It's not safe," Sammy answered. "We need to find help." "There is no help," Delilah replied. "We have to help ourselves, and the sooner you guys get that into your head, the better." Sammy and Tiffany stood silently, and Delilah feared she had spoken too harshly. "I'm sorry, it's just... we can't keep running."
Why not?
Tiffany asked.
We're faster.
"I'm not abandoning my family," Delilah said. Sammy and Tiffany exchanged a glance, and then Sammy stepped forward. "What do you want to do?" Delilah had a plan, but she wasn't sure if it would work. She reached for the hunting blade she always brought outdoors, and Tiffany and Sammy's eyes widened. "I need you to cause a distraction," Delilah said. "Pull the gunmen toward you and stay hidden."
You want us to be bait?
Tiffany asked. "Kind of," Delilah answered, knowing it wouldn't do any good by trying to hide the truth. "Listen, I'll make sure they don't get close." Sammy looked at Delilah's knife. "Are you, She swallowed, unable to finish the thought. "Just stay hidden and make some noise," Delilah said, and she backtracked to sneak around the gunman's rear, while Tiffany and Sammy hid in the dead forest. Delilah silently worked her way behind the gunman chasing them. She had hunted enough in these woods to know how to move without being seen or heard, but she was tracking a different prey. Delilah had never done anything like this before, but these men had every intention of hurting her, and she wasn't going to sit by and do nothing. She finally saw the gunman, who had slowed to a walk. It was clear that he was about to give up and turn around. He probably figured the girls weren't worth his time. But if he returned to the river, her uncle was as good as dead. Delilah waited for Sammy and Tiffany to make a move, but when they stayed silent, Delilah figured they had gotten cold feet. But just before Delilah was going to take matters into her own hands, there was a loud crack of wood where she'd left the other girls. The gunman immediately glanced in the direction of the noise, raising his rifle. He paused, considering whether the chase was worth it, but continued his pursuit. When he started in the direction of the girls, Delilah followed. Delilah remained focused on the man as she stalked him through the woods. She had never been anxious, but she couldn't stop herself from trembling as she moved closer. After years of hunting with her father, she had allowed her feet to find the ground soundlessly without ever having to look down. Delilah focused on breathing, trying to steady herself, but her adrenaline was pumping too quickly. Everything needed to be executed perfectly. And if Delilah showed even 1 ounce of hesitation or miscalculated the tiniest detail, she would be killed, or worse. Delilah had no delusions about these men. It was apparent they were fighters. They were bigger, stronger, faster, and had more experience than Delilah. But as long as Delilah kept her wits about her, used her wits in harmony with her knowledge of how to fight and defend herself, and kept up the surprise attack, Delilah believed she had a fighting chance. But fear was choking out her ability to think straight, and the harder she focused on pushing it out, the stronger it became. But perhaps she was going about fear the wrong way. If she couldn't control it, then maybe she could unleash it. Delilah closed the gap between herself and the gunmen moving through the trees. She readied herself for the surprise attack. Every muscle in her body was coiled and ready to strike. The magnitude of what she was about to do weighed heavy on her. Delilah emerged from her cover, and she drove the blade into the man's neck, covering his mouth as she did it. But while the blade went into the man's flesh, causing blood to spurt out in strong sprays at first, he did not go down quietly. The guttural cry escaped the man's lips before Delilah could clamp her hand over his mouth, and he stumbled from side to side, swinging his arms wildly, trying to buck Delilah off of him. He knocked into nearby trees, flailing, but Delilah never let go. Eventually, the man slowed, and he collapsed to his knees, and then went limp in Delilah's arms as the blood stopped pumping from the wound in his neck. Delilah moved her hand from his mouth and let the man fall forward onto the ash. Delilah stood there, staring down at the dead man, the bloodied knife in her hand. She didn't know how long she stood there before Delilah and Tiffany arrived. But when they looked at her, it was as if they were staring at a wild, feral animal.
What did you do?
Tiffany asked. Delilah shook her head, bringing herself out of the daze. She grabbed the gun from the dead man.
I did what was necessary, Delilah said. Come on. We need to go and get my uncle.
Delilah steered the girls back toward the river. She had gone hunting many times, and she told herself that was what this was, that it was only hunting. But as she stared down at the blood on her hands, she couldn't help but wonder if it was ever going to wash off. Kurt fidgeted anxiously in the restraints the 2 men had put him in. They had his ankles tied and his wrists bound behind his back. One of the gunmen had gone after the girls when they'd taken off. He'd wished they'd stayed away, but he knew how Delilah could get. The longer the man's companion was gone, the angrier Kurt's captor became. He muttered a few things in his native tongue, and Kurt thought he better understood the language's origins. But what he was doing there, he had no idea.
I don't think he's coming back,
Kurt said, pulling the gunman's attention toward him.
Your friend is dead.
The gunman pressed the end of his rifle's barrel against Kurt's forehead, the finger on the trigger.
You'll know nothing.
The man's English was thick with a Russian accent.
I'll kill you now and leave you for the birds.
Kurt wanted to shut his eyes, but he didn't. He stared straight back at the Russian, refusing to show any fear. If this was how he was going to go out, then so be it. The gunshot was loud, but distant. And the bullet sliced right through the Russian's left eye. He collapsed to the rocks on the riverbank, his body making a loud thud on contact. Kurt sucked in a deep breath, not even realizing he'd been holding it.
Uncle Kurt!
Delilah shouted, her voice distant as she rushed toward him. Kurt couldn't see behind him, but he heard footsteps as the girls approached, and Delilah skidded to a stop.
Jesus,
Kurt said, noticing how Delilah was covered in blood.
Are you all right?
What?
Oh, yeah, it's not mine,
Delilah answered, and then she used her bloody knife to cut his ties. The other girls had followed, and Kurt was glad everyone was alive. But as he studied his niece, he noticed a change in her.
Who were these guys?
Delilah asked, staring down at the man she'd shot. Kurt removed the man's weapon and patted him down.
They're Russians.
Russians?
Tiffany asked,
What the hell are Russians doing in Spokane?
I don't know, Kurt answered. But we'll take their boat and head down the river toward the city. From there, we can get everyone home.
They confiscated the boat, and once everyone climbed in, they made their way downriver, leaving the 2 dead Russians in the charred remains of the forest, letting the wind bury their bodies with ash. Chapter 14. It was madness, all of it. And it was a blur. But in the end, when it was all said and done, Buford Tannen was alive, and a trail of bodies was left in his wake. He glanced down once at his body, which had blood splattered on it from one of the mob members who had charged at him when his bodyguard had opened fire. And even among the chaos of all the shootings and the fear coursing through his veins at the prospect of his potential death, the first thought that popped into his head was that his tailored $5,000 suit was ruined. Buford believed that told him something about himself. It confirmed what he'd always known but had never dared to speak aloud. He didn't care about human life. He never had, and he never would. The only thing that concerned him was survival. And when Buford was finally able to see the truth himself, he smiled. It was like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. As the security detail pushed through the swarms of people who had tried to stop him, he discovered another truth he had always believed to be true. Money really could buy anything. The security detail had fought like animals to get them out alive. Buford understood that they were also keeping themselves alive in the process. But as long as he survived, that was the only truth that mattered. The mob had first put up a good fight, their anger overpowering their fear, but after the first dozen bodies had dropped, the excitement wore off. They chased them for a little bit, chanting their threats, but the security detail had plenty of ammunition, and they had impeccable aim, even at a distance. It wasn't until they were off the highway that the mob had finally stopped their pursuit. But when they entered downtown, they encountered even more chaos. The fabric of society had unraveled, and Buford watched as stores were looted, people were robbed, and everyone had become a victim in some way. A few people had tried to come after them, but the fact that Buford and his guards were splattered with blood made most people give them a wide berth.
"Get me to my apartment," Buford said, wheezing. "My building will have security measures to keep out these animals."
The security guards exchanged glances. And Buford wondered for a brief moment if they were having second thoughts about continuing.
"I own you,"
Buford said, looking at the pair of guards.
"Do you have any idea how many people you just killed? Without me, you'll go to prison for the rest of your life. But I can make sure that doesn't happen. I can protect you."
Buford had no affection for Thing 1 and Thing 2, but he needed them to escort him to his apartment. Once he was there, he could rest and have a moment to think about what he needed to do next.
"We need to stay off the main streets,"
Thing 1 said.
"Come on."
The pair pulled Buford through the back alleys, where they still ran into a few people, but no one bothered them. Buford desperately wanted to stop, but he feared that once he did, he wouldn't be able to get going again. Momentum was his friend. The farther they moved to downtown center, the taller the buildings grew and the more violent people became. But as they entered the madness, Buford noticed something peculiar. With so many people fighting amongst themselves, no one was bothering with them anymore. It was the Wild West, everyone fending for themselves. Fear and violence reigned supreme, and as they neared the front lobby of Buford's building, Buford believed he could use this to his advantage. The doorman had abandoned his post. But the building security, whom Buford paid a fortune to stand guard, was still at their post, and let them inside when Thing 1 and Thing 2 pounded on the entrance. Once in the building, the guards fended off some people begging them to come inside. One of them was a woman with a child, clutching her little one close to her chest as she pleaded for mercy. "We have nowhere else to go," the mother cried.
Sure you do,
Buford said.
The river's right behind us. Why don't you go and drown that crying mongrel so you don't have another mouth to feed?
The woman stood back, aghast, and sprinted away as the security team locked the lobby.
Mr. Tannen, we've kept the building secure, but no power is running anywhere, and our communication lines are down.
Dave Pincer was the head of building security. He was a mountain of a man and had been instrumental in hiring all the guards around them. He was also incredibly loyal to Buford.
Residents inside are getting restless to leave.
You tell anyone if they leave. They will not be let back inside,
Buford said.
This is our fortress, and the entire town is under siege.
Yes, sir,
Dave said.
Is there anything we can get you?
Buford studied the men around him and believed they could help take advantage of the situation.
I need to speak with you,
Buford said.
In private.
Dave shot his men a look, and everyone dispersed.
Do you see what's happening out there?
Buford asked.
Yes, sir,
Dave answered.
It's chaos.
No,
Buford replied.
It's an opportunity. Opportunity to take advantage of a moment that might never happen again.
What do you want me to do, sir?
Dave asked.
I want you to take a crew and go out and grab as much food, water, and other supplies as you can and bring it back here,
Buford answered. Dave frowned in confusion.
Sir, we have everything we need here, and I'm sure this will all blow over.
This isn't blowing over,
Buford said.
Just look at what's happening out there, for crying out loud.
He pointed into the streets.
This isn't something we come back from. But we can put ourselves in a position of power. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir,
Dave answered.
I'll put the team together.
Good,
Buford said, and then he grabbed Dave's arm before he walked away.
And make sure you don't let anyone else inside. You only bring back supplies, not people. Understand?
He stopped himself.
On second thought, if they have medical training, bring them. Doctors will be valuable.
Yes, sir,
Dave said. Once his minions were ready to steal supplies, Buford was brought out a wheelchair, and he collapsed in it, finally catching his breath.
Take me to the back,
Buford said.
I want to see the water.
Buford had purchased this building because it was located directly on the river, and the waterfront property yielded the most return on investment. Thing One parked him near a window overlooking the marina and the river. Buford had supported legislation that made his building the only one in the city with a dock on the river. It allowed him to charge whatever he wanted for dock slips, and people paid him because they wished to access it. There wasn't much movement on the water today, but Buford noticed a small boat, a dinghy really, being maneuvered down the river. He watched it like an ant crawling all by its lonesome, and then, when it docked at one of the open spots, he frowned. Buford's vision wasn't what it used to be, but as he studied the people in the boat, he noticed a familiar face. Buford had learned as much about Luke Stevens as possible when he had decided to buy the land for his mining operations. He knew Luke's likes, dislikes, and everything in between. He had hoped to dig up some dirt on the man, but he was too clean. His investigators had found nothing. But Buford remembered how the investigators told him how much he was a family man. Buford had seen pictures of his wife and children. It was apparent the man loved them dearly. And as Buford saw a young girl step onto the dock, he knew who she was. It was Delilah Stevens. Buford cackled to himself, and Thing One and Thing Two walked over to him.
Are you all right, sir?
Thing One asked.
Oh, yes, I am,
Buford answered, then pointed to the family below.
Bring them to me, but keep them alive. I want to kill them myself.
Chapter 15. As Delilah and the others cruised down the river toward the city, They eventually came across the fires again, which had slowed. Kurt said it was likely because the wind had died down or the fires were running low on fuel to burn. But as they cruised past the fires, keeping to the far side of the river to avoid the worst of the smoke, Delilah and the other girl sat in awe of what they were witnessing. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen. It was one thing to be in the fires, but another to see what they had survived. The rising flames stretched for miles. It was a blazing inferno of shades of orange and red, billowing smoke blocking the sky. They had come so close to death, but there they were, alive, cruising the river past the inferno.
Do you think the fires will jump the river? Sammy asked.
It's not likely, but it's also not impossible,
Kurt answered.
If the wind picks up high enough, or the flames reach the narrow point in the river like the one south of the city, it could jump.
And what happens if it jumps?
Tiffany asked.
Where the hell are we supposed to go then?
Kurt was silent for a moment, and then he shrugged.
I have no idea.
It could have been that Kurt had spent the past few years working to stop the spread of wildfires, or that he was the only adult among them, but his lack of insight into what was coming made everyone more nervous. Kurt quickly assured the girls that the fire was unlikely to cross the river, but as Tiffany promptly pointed out, so was everything that had just happened to them. But while everyone else was thinking about what came next, Delilah traveled into the past. She was thinking about Casey, and his burned body, and what it was like to be burned alive. She also thought about what it would have been like to be stabbed in the neck, like the man she'd killed, or shot in the head. Delilah replayed those moments over and over again, seeing every detail. She stared down at the blood that was still on her hands, and she immediately dunked them over the side of the John boat and into the river. Delilah rubbed her palms together, watching the blood trail in the wake of the water. When she pulled her hands from the river, they were still slightly red, but most of the blood had come off.
Hey, are you all right?
Sammy asked, gently touching Delilah's shoulder, but she jumped when Sammy touched her skin.
Whoa, it's just me. Sorry,
Delilah answered.
I'm just a little on edge. It's okay,
Sammy said.
If you want to talk about it.
Not right now, Delilah answered. Sammy nodded, and she didn't push the subject. Delilah wasn't sure if she would ever be ready to talk about it, but it was just too much right now. Delilah remained quiet for the rest of the trip down the river. They eventually passed the fires and saw Spokane's skyline ahead, along with a few columns of smoke. Because both Sammy and Tiffany lived around the city center, Kurt suggested they dock at the marina to save time and secure the boat. Delilah nodded. She knew the marina Kurt referred to. It belonged to one of the most wicked men she'd ever known. Buford Tannen and her father had developed a tumultuous relationship over a land deal. But her father had stood strong against him, never giving in to his demands. Delilah grabbed one of the cleats on the dock and helped keep the little John boat in place as they exited it. Everyone stood awkwardly for a moment, and Delilah realized they were unsure if they could come with her or where to go. Sammy's family was likely still evacuating from the fires, and Tiffany lived in one of the more affluent neighborhoods of downtown, which were now a source of crime and violence.
We can get you where you need to go,
Kurt said, hopefully putting the two girls at ease.
Or you're welcome to come with us.
Delilah wasn't sure how her father would react to Kurt offering their cabin, but she hoped he didn't mind. Her father had always told her that they had prepared the way they did so they could first protect themselves and then protect others. She always believed that was a noble cause.
I should probably get home,
Tiffany said. But she sounded unsure of herself as she gazed into the downtown violence. We'll go with you, Delilah said. Make sure you get home safe. She looked at Sammy. And you can come to the cabin with us, Sammy.
Thanks,
Sammy said.
I wouldn't even know where to go.
The four of them headed up the dock, Delilah and Kurt armed with rifles. Delilah wasn't sure what kind of trouble they'd find, but as the wind kicked up behind them, she turned and saw smoke blowing in their direction. It was an ominous sign, but not as frightening as the gunshots at the front of the dock. When Delilah spun around, she saw several men dressed in suits blocking the one escape route off the dock.
No one moves.
One of the men, who was part of the blockade, had a thundering voice.
We have 6 guns trained on you, 4 that you can see. You need to drop your weapons and come with us.
Who the hell are you? Kurt asked, ignoring the order.
I represent someone who wants to speak with you,
he answered.
You put down your weapons, or we start shooting the girls who don't have guns.
Tiffany and Sammy whispered, but Kurt stepped in front of them, and Delilah stood by their side.
I'll take down at least 2 of you,
Kurt said.
And then those girls die,
the man said.
Your choice.
Delilah's heart was hammering. She was a hunter and knew how to handle a weapon, but this was completely different. This was a standoff. She didn't know what to do, but trusted that her Uncle Kurt would know the best action.
This offer won't last forever,
the man said. Kurt glanced behind him and caught Delilah's stare. He nodded and slowly lowered his gun. Buford watched the events unfold from behind the glass, which was good because the wind was picking up something awful, kicking smoke and bits of embers into the sky. He imagined that would choke out some of the riffraff outside. But once his security team brought back supplies, he could handle whatever came next. They were already in a good position in the building. They had food and their storage of water, which Buford had purchased specifically for the building. Buford could watch the world eat itself from his ivory tower. And then, when the plebeians were too weak to resist him, he would swoop in like a god. That was what true wealth and power could buy. Buford could do whatever he wanted because he had more money than anyone. He could make or break someone with a simple nod or shake of his head. Buford thrived on that kind of power. It was the best drug he'd ever taken, but it was a drug that required a higher and stronger dose after each fresh hit. It was the reason for his never-ending desire of wealth, even at his advanced age. When Luke Stevens' daughter dropped the weapon on the dock, and his men took them into their custody, Buford felt the familiar surge of power flood his body.
Sir,
Dave said before the others were escorted back into the building.
We're noticing a lot of smoke heading in our direction.
What of it?
Buford answered.
Those people are covered in ash and soot,
Dave answered.
I think there's a wildfire coming this way.
Are you blind?
Buford asked, and he pointed out to the water.
The river is right there. We're perfectly safe.
It's not just the fires, sir,
Dave answered.
The smoke and wind could affect visibility and make it difficult to find the items you requested.
That's not my problem,
Buford growled.
I give you an order, and you follow it. Understand?
Dave nodded.
Yes, sir.
He straightened up.
Where do you want me to take them?
Bring them up to my penthouse,
Buford said.
And then have the boys carry me up.
The wind picked up fast when Delilah and the others were brought into the building. A massive gust practically shoved everyone inside, and the armed men who had taken them struggled to shut the door behind them. Delilah glanced behind them. The smoke grew so thick that they couldn't see the river anymore. She still didn't understand what was going on, and when she asked the men who'd threatened to shoot them, they said nothing. They were brought to the stairs and forced to climb to the top. Drenched in sweat, they finally reached the penthouse and were ushered into a room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Delilah imagined it would be a beautiful view any other day, but right now she saw the fires picking up steam again and heading toward them. It was hard to see everything, but she saw the fires inching closer to the river between the gusts of smoke.
Who are these guys?
Kurt asked. They work for Buford Tannen, Delilah answered, putting 2 and 2 together.
And who is that?
Kurt asked. Someone who doesn't like my dad, Delilah answered.
And what does that have to do with us?
Tiffany asked. They were alone in the room, but the guards were just on the other side of the open door. So whatever they said, they would hear. Kurt walked over to Delilah and kept his voice low.
What kind of cow pie did we just step in?
Kurt asked. Not sure yet, Delilah answered. But considering they threatened to kill us, I don't think it's going to end well. They waited a little longer, and then Buford Tannen was pushed into the room in a wheelchair.
Well, 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 Buford said. I suppose Christmas has come early for me.
Let them go,
Kurt said, stepping forward.
They haven't done anything wrong.
I disagree, Buford said. That dock down there is private property. And I know none of you are a member.
What do you want? Delilah asked, cutting to the chase. Buford smiled and pointed his finger at Delilah.
You're just like your father, always wanting to get to the point. I might not like your father, but I respect that about him.
He folded his hands in his lap.
One of you will fetch him and bring him back here.
No, Delilah said.
Oh, it won't be you, girl,
Buford answered, and then looked at Kurt.
You'll be the one taking that trip.
I'm not leaving the girls here with you,
Kurt said.
They'll be perfectly safe here, Buford said. And besides, you don't have a choice.
Delilah was confident her uncle wanted to try to shoot their way out of this. But they weren't in any position to go on the offensive. At least, not yet anyway. What about the fires? Sammy asked, and she pointed to the window. Those flames are heading this way, and the wind is picking up.
Again with the fires, Buford said, exasperated. We have an entire river separating us from those flames. Now stop stalling, and you, get moving.
Kurt was shoved out of the room, leaving Buford alone with Delilah and her friends.
Now, girls, Buford said, why don't you all get comfortable?
The guard behind Kurt kept the gun pointed down at him the first flight of stairs. But while Kurt was silent, he was trying to find the right moment to make his move. Kurt had no intention of leaving the girls there, but he couldn't save them with a bullet to the back of his head. Kurt might not have been a soldier or a master assassin, but he had worked plenty of high-stress jobs, and no matter how sharp someone was, a long day stole a person's focus. Kurt had caught the man behind him opening his mouth to yawn twice on the way up, which told Kurt he wasn't at 100%. And while Kurt was tired, he trusted himself enough to take the gunman down. After 5 floors, Kurt slowed down a bit, and the guard shoved him forward. Kurt nearly tumbled down the steps, but he caught himself. He glanced back at the guard to get a better look at him.
Face forward,
he said.
Now.
He waved the gun in Kurt's face as an added threat, but Kurt saw what he needed. The man didn't keep his finger on the trigger. He waited one more flight of stairs, and when they arrived at the platform for the switchback, he made his move. Kurt spun around, leading with his elbow as he connected with the arm that was holding the gun. Kurt followed that up with a stiff right hook to the guard's face, knocking him back a few steps. Kurt rushed forward, never relenting as he shoved the man down the stairs. The guard tumbled head over foot, and when he landed on the floor below, he lay on his stomach, entirely still. Kurt had heard the sharp snap of a bone, and when the guard didn't get up, he figured it was a snapped neck. Kurt reached for the gun and then checked the man's vitals, confirming that he was dead. He then bounded up the steps back to the penthouse to save his niece and her friends. Buford Tannen had a rotten smile. Delilah had never seen him up close, but the man's teeth were yellow and stained, and he had horrible breath. Delilah smelled it from across the room.
Not hungry?
Buford asked, shoveling some crackers with seafood spread into his mouth. I've lost my appetite, Delilah answered.
You know, the problem with your generation is that you don't know how to enjoy the good times, Buford said. You're always worried about the future. Live in the now.
You mean we shouldn't be worried about the fire burning across the river? Delilah asked.
It'll die out,
Buford answered.
They always do.
I can't wait for you to die out, Delilah said. Buford laughed, nearly choking on his cracker, which Delilah hoped he would. He reached for his glass of water and cleared his throat.
Just like your father, Buford said. You even look like him. Same nose, same stare, same fucking attitude.
What do you think is going to happen? Delilah asked. Do you think my father will just give you whatever you want?
I already have what I want from your father, Buford answered. He signed the land over to me this morning.
Delilah frowned. You're lying. Buford reached into his jacket and tossed a pile of papers at her.
Those are just copies, but the signature is there.
Delilah scanned the documents and saw Buford was telling the truth. He wouldn't do this willingly. She looked at him. What did you do?
I broke him,
Buford answered. Bullshit, Delilah said.
There is only room for one person at the top, Buford said. Your father understood that. In time, you'll understand that too.
Delilah couldn't believe her father would have handed over the land unless Buford had threatened him with something terrible. Her father loved his work, and being a steward to the land of the forest, which provided him with so much. To give it over to the man with no regard for anything didn't make sense.
So, Buford said, why don't you girls?
The first gunshot made everyone in the room jump. But the next ones caused Delilah to reach for the knife on the coffee table between the couches, and she rushed over to Buford and placed the blade to his throat. Sammy, Tiffany, behind me now! Delilah shouted. The girls quickly followed her command and crouched low behind her. What the hell are you doing? Buford asked, his jowls wiggling. Quiet, Delilah said. The gunshots near the front finally died out, and Delilah waited for the guards to rush inside. But instead of strangers, Kurt entered.
Are you guys okay?
Kurt asked. Delilah dropped the knife and then sprinted to her uncle. She wrapped her arms around him and squeezed him tight. Delilah stepped back and then punched him in the arm.
Whoa, hey! I wasn't gone for that long.
Kurt rubbed his arm and then gestured to Buford.
What about him?
Buford was trembling in his chair, and when Kurt aimed the gun at him, Delilah was sure he had soiled himself. Leave him, Delilah said. He thinks he'll survive this, but he won't. He has no idea what will happen to this building once his guards don't want to protect him anymore.
You're lying, Buford said. I'll make it through this. I'm rich. I have money. I have everything I need right here.
He pounded his fists on his chair like a child. You have nothing, Delilah said. And by the time you realize that, it'll be too late. They all left the penthouse and hurried down the stairs to escape the building, leaving Buford Tannen in his ivory tower to waste away.